Welcome to the MRX Influencers Podcast, where you come for the insights, but stay for the good times. I'm Dan Fleetwood, and on this podcast, I chat with the best and brightest minds in the research space. On this episode, I chat with Axel Kirstetter, who is a VP in the research space, a coach, a mentor, even a marathon runner, and he's really the go-to guy for anything pricing analytics, pricing research. So that's what we have a conversation about today. You also might hear some comments from Crystal Weiss, who is the director of marketing here at Question Pro. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Axel, hey, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dan, great to be here. Although I'm not sure I am the man of the show anymore because of that build-up you guys just did. I think the place to be is at our next day. So great job. I can't wait to listen to myself.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. No, thank you. So for those who don't know, Axel Kirstetter, he was a VP at DataSite, has done a lot in pricing analytics, pricing research. He's like the go-to guy for this. Every time I talk with him, I feel smarter. So Axel, thank you for that.
And you humble me.
He's a coach, he's a consultant, and he's a marathon runner. So that's something that also is interesting to me outside of the pricing analytics stuff. So yeah, no, welcome.
Thanks. Great to be here. Thanks, Dan.
Perfect. So what I wanted to talk about today, and obviously the theme for the show is, pricing methodologies, analytics. And, I think a good way to kick it off, Axel, would be kind of let us know, how does pricing research differ from normal B2B research in your mind?
Yeah, one of the things I always find fascinating is you have sort of pricing people and then research people, and they don't always realize they actually overlap in a lot of what they do. But one of the big differences between research for pricing purposes is that the intent of it is really, it's supposed to be ongoing. Preferences change, competitors exit the market, new capabilities are being launched. And so you kind of have to do on an ongoing basis the polling of the audience of the market to understand really how features, capabilities, services, etc., are being valued. Whereas quite often in B2B, the pure researching element is a little bit more akin to surveying. So you go in one time and you understand on a specific need basis, what is it that people are trying to do? So that's kind of one of the big differences. Another one to highlight is also in pricing, you kind of need to keep a cohort consistency so that as when you do a little bit of research, you don't actually fully lose the contact with what did the audience tell you last time, and as you go into the next round, Crystal, is it just me or did Dan go to have a bio break again?
Oh no! Oh man! Well, you can tell me, Axel.
I will just keep going, and I no doubt Dan will be coming back. There he is.
We're having some technical difficulties today.
Woo,
apparently, happened to Crystal, happened to me.
Today.
So, yeah. Sorry, Axel.
Dan, I was just saying one of the other things to look into as well is a cohort commonality, so that as and when you do your pricing research, you go back to the same people and understand their values as opposed to different people who may have different characteristics. One of the big things in B2B in particular is, firmographics. So understand how a person fits into an organization. What do they do given their profile within an organization? That sort of also gives you a bit of a feeling for how they perceive certain things and the value they attribute to them.
Right. No, that makes sense. Do you feel like pricing research isn't done enough? Like it's almost done that you need to continually do? And I know you mentioned earlier that, things change, the market changes. Obviously, pandemics happen, things like that. Do you feel like it needs to be done more frequently, or what would you say to that?
Definitely. There's a distinction between, Crystal, you just joked about qualitative, quantitative. But at the very least, on the qualitative side, whenever you can do client interviews, prospect interviews, trying to understand their value perception, it's definitely an exercise worth doing. it's qualitative in nature, so it's an impression, an opinion, and then as a pricing researcher, once in a while you do need to put that into a quantitative context. So if someone says, "Hey, this is worth $15 a month to me," whatever, that's one person's opinion. But how does that now multiply across cohort, across segments, etc., to really get the feeling for how do you maximize your revenues or whatever your pricing objectives are?
Yeah, that's interesting. Interesting. So talking about some of the pricing research and so forth. What are some of your go-to methodologies, some of your favorite ones that you like to use in the context of pricing research?
Yeah, I think maybe before I get to that, I think it's sort of also important to state, like, how do you get from a capability to then here's a statement of work, or here's the actual price point, the stages you got to go through. And so to me, that's sort of my mini methodology. You first starting point, research the value and understand a little bit how people are thinking about what is it you do. Got to model it out, financial service perspective, what revenue is going to be yielding. It's not all about the client's appreciation of value. It's also how do you maximize revenue or profit or whatever you're trying to achieve from a sort of revenue objective. Then in more sizable organizations, you have to implement it into systems, which is not an underestimated challenge. So update your ERP, update your CRMs, all that sort of stuff. And sometimes, hello Dan. Sometimes you end up along the way. You end up sort of having to make some compromise on the initial pricing intention. Certainly, at the way packagings are being established, just because there are inevitably system limitations going to happen. Fourth step, big element. I'm sorry, Chris. Do you want to ask something?
Oh no, I was going to say, like, how do some of those extra elements influence the pricing methodology you use? So if there are extra elements like packaging or, experimental activities or, like Airbnb experience is priced differently than Airbnb houses. Like what pricing methodologies do you use based on almost the tangible goods of it?
Yeah, I mean, look, if someone says, I associate, if you find out that, there's an association of value of 999 behind it, you can split that out in different ways. You can sort of divide it by 12 months, keep it linear and keep it at one price point, depending on what system you have. And the example I give is a very basic one, but you have rounding issues to think through, you have term issues to think through. You might have to just make a compromise on what the initial ideal clean sort of pricing approach is going to be. Especially as you go down the weeds, there's a lot of things to look into. Commissions, if you need to pay out partners for certain things, it does impact how you approach the whole topic somewhere. Wow. But anyways, then you got communication. So train your sales team, train your partners, train the customer also on what the new pricing means. And then obviously over time, you need to optimize it. But the question that Dan asked was research methodology all the way back.
You bring up a good point, because I think we can maybe get to this a little bit later if there's time, but you do all this research, but you mentioned implementation of it, right? I think that's actually that's kind of a bigger challenge than I think you were alluding to in terms of getting everybody on board with these big pricing changes. So maybe if we can bookmark that and come back to it if it makes sense, or we have time.
After X Day. After X Day.
Okay. After X Day. Part two. How to implement. Yeah.
And so, you asked sort of about pricing methodologies, techniques. I think we already talked about the sort of qualitative, quantitative balance. Certainly I always appreciate the qualitative also because it provides a bit of an anchoring. So when you talk to someone, hey, how do you think about this? They will tell you, I think of it in such a way, and they anchor it against a competitive something or against sort of just a value appreciation. And that gives you a very good indication of, what parameters can you work with. Anyway, so don't underestimate the qualitative side. But for quantitative, you got to go to Question Pro.
Right.
Because suddenly you do need to take it to another level, which is just because one person, 5, 10 people say, this is what it is, you do need to statistically validate it. And so, work with panels and sort of go after it in that way. Should we talk about specific methodologies?
Yeah, maybe just touch on a few that you think, would be helpful.
They always have the most fun names. And then Dan always makes fun of me for mispronouncing them.
there's two different types, right? There's conjoint and max diff. They're closely related in terms of what they do. Conjoint, it's pretty much about comparing feature preferences. So you prefer feature A or feature B, and then B versus C and C versus A, and it gives you just an indication of how someone appreciates the functionality. It's not as ideal for the price representation because you can put down feature A. Do you want to pay this or that and that? But it's the context, the whole is missing. But it is useful to understand what feature is driving value appreciation and which one is distracting from it. Even though a product is a product. You can't just take off a feature and then say, "Hey, you still have the same product." That's how it works. Take the wheels off a car. Well, I'm not sure that's still a car. And so, but within that, people appreciate the steering wheel, maybe a little bit more the electronics. It just gives you an indication as to how you should be messaging it and so forth.
Right.
Max diff, closely related to conjoint, but it treats the features as a sort of whole, and so basically you'd end up ranking them, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that sort of gives you a little bit of an indication as to what really is the in isolation the top element that exists, which is really quite a popular way in the sort of silver, bronze, gold type of an estimation to come up with a statement. There are two other ones as well. Van Westendorp and Garber-Granger.
Yeah,
which
these are some of my favorites. So.
This is where Crystal's going, how do you pronounce it?
No, we've had long debates, and then they're like, "Crystal, this is your favorite type." And I'm like, I don't have a favorite type. I don't know.
I joke because Axel, I think she has to have like a favorite question type, a favorite logic type, these kind of things. So
it's true.
Yeah.
I think one Van Westendorp, I believe, is a Dutch researcher from the 60s, 70s. Garber-Granger, I think, is two Hungarian researchers, also from the 60s, 70s. Either way, they gave name to that methodology, to those methodologies.
Right.
So Van Westendorp, they both utilize a similar system. They basically ask, hey, how much would you pay for this? And that this needs to be described. That's the challenge here. It's, in consumer goods, you need to be, Sawa did in the past, you literally provide the packaging. This is it. This is packaging, cereal box, whatever. How much would you pay for it? One will ask you top down, would you pay this? Would you pay that? At some point you get a no. And then also bottom up, would you pay this? Would you pay that? And at some point, no, and then you get to yes.
Yep.
And that sort of range, people appreciate it differently, will allow you to understand the sensitivity for price. And that's really helpful when you want to sort of work within the parameters of typically for pricing strategies. You want to be premium, economy, skimming, penetration pricing, and it gives you room to play with, because you can see these sort of X amount will say yes, and then goes down to only 1 or 2 will say yes to that price when it gets really quite expensive, and likewise also the reverse. And it's really, really powerful for establishing a sort of sensitivity. The other one, Garber-Granger, need to take a breath here.
It's a sprint, Axel. Live with Dan.
Sprint. Garber-Granger is very useful for price elasticity. So sensitivity, elasticity. And the elasticity model is really quite helpful. It's kind of more of a straight line that says, volume times price. And that allows you to do some good work for estimating market share and profitability. So it depends a little bit on what the overall objective that you're trying to go after. It's not always about what clients and consumers are willing to pay, but it's also about the context of what as an organization you're trying to do.
Right, makes sense. And I mean, like, to put it simply, would you use Van Westendorp when you're not really sure what to charge, and then use Garber-Granger when you kind of have a price but you want to see more of the elasticity and the nature of it? Is that?
I think that's a good rule of thumb. Yep.
Okay, makes sense.
Good rule of thumb. Yep.
Makes sense. And then, so we kind of talked about, like the purpose for each methodology and so forth. What have you found is most helpful? Does it depend on the situation, or where you say like Garber-Granger is definitely the way to go because we already have a lot of our prices figured out? We want to just kind of figure out where we can tweak them, or are you more of a fan of like Van Westendorp, where I guess it depends on the situation, but what's more common in your estimation?
I think Garber Granger is a little bit easier to set up, and I think people sort of find that a little bit easier. I remember, when I used Van Westendorp effectively, it was complex to set up, but the insight was so powerful. You could really understand very well sort of various elements. We used it with a partner organization as well in terms of helping them to. So we had to recommend the price, but they selected the price that they wanted to be at, and they could work out, well, we are more expensive a brand, so that's where we select the premium element. Others went for cheaper components. So absolutely depends on who you are as a company.
Right. What are some mistakes that you see like project managers or market researchers make in terms of pricing research?
Yeah, so within my domain, the sort of product management, product marketing environment, what I know product managers always love the willingness to pay statement, and I find that very unhelpful. It's not about how much are you willing to pay; it's how much value do you attribute to something. And as I said, you might have a different perception, especially if something is super urgent. So, for example, you are in desperate need of doing a COVID test because you're about to take an airplane tomorrow. Then your willingness to pay is a little bit higher, and really, it's the value that you attribute to that situation a little higher. But just doing a COVID test out of the blue, well, zero. I don't want to pay for it unless I have the need for it. So that's one. Segmentation is sort of critical to just because you interview 1, 2, 3 people, they are not necessarily reflective of the entire market that you should be going after. Men always appreciate things very differently to women, and so you should really understand, how do women value certain capabilities, and quite often that sort of segmentation, which is actually a lot of work, is being skimmed over and skipped over. But I recommend to do solid segmentation work. And then software, B2B, sort of my immediate background, the tendency to think too much along the lines of that good, better, best approach and 3 levels. That's not what pricing is about. There are other ways to price things out, and certainly a popular role based or admin user and reviewer user, and they again value things differently. It's about the revenue modeling. So you got to think a little bit more along the lines of given the permutations we have, how much money could we make out of different circumstances? And popular right now, consumption. Pay maybe a platform fee, and then according to how much you consume of whatever you're buying, sort of tightly aligned with value, with using the stuff, as opposed to just pay a lot and then see if you use it, and then we'll talk about it again once the renewal's up.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. I like what you said around like a lot of it depends on the value. It's not necessarily the price; it's the value and where you're at in time. Like if you need to catch a flight for an emergency, you're kind of price insensitive at that point, right? Or you need your car fixed to go this, like it's not going to matter as much as if you have more time. So taking it out of context, I think is super interesting.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I think, obviously I want to talk a little about freemium models and so forth. Question Bro has a freemium model that, Crystal, you help put that together.
Question Bro Essentials.
Yeah. See, there you go.
The best feature-filled free survey software on the market.
See, there you go.
Sign up today.
So where does like the freemium models fit into pricing research, and what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I have strong views on freemium. It's a great acquisition tool. So usually after freemium comes premium, and so you attract an audience with the free offering, brand exposure. You get some initial clicks going, all of which is super helpful. But it's not really a pricing model. It really allows you to attract an audience because because they're willing to pay 0 doesn't mean that tomorrow they're willing to pay 1,000. And you kind of haven't established the value. If it well executed sort of freemium strategy means a solid offering, solid environment, full exposure to whatever tools you select as part of that freemium, good service experience, exposure to the brand, hopefully invite to the X day as well, in order to get a full, exposure to what it can do. But then there's still work required, and that's still the pricing game to get them to pay for the stuff. And I think quite often people confuse a sort of free trial, which is the fully paid version, with a freemium, which is a subset of the full version. Different tools, different techniques, but either way, you can sort of play around with that. I'm a big believer in freemium just because of that easiest way to acquire an audience, but not a big believer in freemium as a pricing strategy because you pay exactly zero.
I like that. Dan, that sounds like a topic we need for our X Day in the spring.
I know. I was just thinking that. Like, there's so much to unpack there. Like, so actually, maybe inviting me back.
I'll be back.
I was like, don't be surprised if I hit you up in May, and I'm like, oh, hello.
We're back.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I would love to dive more into like when to use a freemium model, when to use free trial, like kind of what's better there. Maybe we can tease that as like a future topic.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Awesome. Well, hey, Axel, thanks so much for joining us today. If there's any questions, feel free to reach out to Axel. I know he's active on LinkedIn. Reach out to me. I can always pass them along, but to Axel. But yeah, no, Axel, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Nice job, Crystal, moderating this, putting it together. And I hope you have resolved all your bathroom break issues, Dan.
I know. That's right. It's too much coffee this morning.
So many times.
Awesome. Hey, Axel, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks so much for listening to the MRX Influencers podcast. If you want more information about Question Pro, go to questionpro.com. If you want to follow me, feel free to do so on LinkedIn or Twitter. Until next time, we'll see you later.